Now, I'd like to introduce our presenter, our guest speaker, David Santos. David has 25 years of experience developing talent strategies for global companies and marketing agencies. And he has been committed to elevating underrepresented voices throughout his career. And he has volunteered with Taproot for the past year, which we're excited about. David, thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. And I'm happy to share my experiences with the group of wonderful nonprofit organizations on the phone. So as mentioned, I have about 25 years of experience, and most of what I'm sharing with you are common practices in the for-profit world. I believe most of them apply as well to the nonprofit world, including hopefully ideas that you can apply to recruiting volunteers. So we can talk about that as we go along. Why don't we go to the next slide? Great. So anyway, as already mentioned, I've been working in this space for a long time. And I thought it would be helpful just to sort of ground what talent management is in organizations. And there are generally 4 pillars: talent acquisition, which is hiring; employee engagement, which entails a number of different ways to ensure your people are enjoying and feeling valued in the work they do. Professional development is an incredible important thing to particularly the incoming workforce. They are more aware than any of us how quickly the world is changing, and they're very committed to continuous professional development. Otherwise, they fear their skills will fall behind. And then overall retention strategies. But I'm aware that this group, generally speaking, doesn't have huge staffs. So what I'm going to focus on today is the recruiting and onboarding process of new employees. And again, hopefully much of this applies to hiring volunteers. Next slide. Thank you. So this is effectively our agenda. I thought it'd be helpful to just level set a bit with what is going on in the world of talent acquisition and recruiting, and then go through a few steps about what an engaging and effective hiring process looks like. There's other ideas, but these are just some that come to mind when I think about it. Onboarding, which is bringing the person into the company on the first day, is a somewhat overlooked aspect of bringing people in an engaging way. And sometimes that first day or week can make it or break it. So it's important to put some time and effort into making sure the onboarding is engaging and effective. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about what can you do with this information to improve your recruiting efforts for your businesses. So as I said, I'm going to cover a fair bit of content quickly so we can get to the Q&A. I'm a New Yorker, so I do speak fast, so that shouldn't be a problem. Okay, next slide. So what is the 2023 hiring landscape? It's confusing. And if you feel confused by it or challenged by it, just know that you're not alone. We continue to hear we have the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years, yet we also are continuing to read about pretty large scale layoffs in many businesses, particularly technology businesses that overhired during the pandemic because they were having such success during the pandemic, but they overhired and they're making adjustments. But what does that mean in terms of the landscape? Is it helpful, or is it suggesting that there's a recession coming? I don't have an answer to that. I'm just saying these are factors in all aspects of hiring. Remote work is pretty critical these days, although with the layoffs in tech companies, some people think they're going to kind of reel people back in. I would encourage you not to do that, because that can be a differentiator as you go forward to continue to allow work from home. And the other advantage to allowing remote work is that the talent pool is no longer your town or county or state or country. It can go as far as you think makes sense. If you want to hire a software engineer in India, and you can do that easier than before because more companies have work from home. And then AI, I don't want to overstate what's coming because I don't know, but I'm sure many of you are aware that artificial intelligence, there was a big to-do about ChatGPT, which is an artificial intelligence tool that's available to anyone, and you can just go to that site and play around with it. And it's pretty astonishing what AI will do, in the workforce, and it's yet to be determined, but it's certainly going to have an impact and will, further confuse the hiring landscape. The next slide, what I want to just state about what I said about the hiring landscape is let's just ignore that as much as we can for now, because we don't know what changes will come. So by ignore, I mean, let's just assume that's the hiring landscape that we're all in today. And if it adjusts significantly, then we'll make changes to how we approach hiring. I think it's very important, and this is where you may find ideas that will help your organization stand out as candidates are looking at opportunities in for-profit or nonprofit. So here are sort of 8 points that I find very salient in what candidates are looking for. Employees are no longer satisfied, working on, making widgets all day and not knowing, how that widget fits into the bigger product or service of the company. Employees today, at whatever level, in whatever role, generally speaking, these are all generalizations, they want to know what they're doing and how it's helping, the organization be successful. So this has been a change over the past 5 or 10 years, but a lot of these trends have been accelerated due to the pandemic. As we all know, the pandemic accelerated many trends. Flexibility about where and when we work, we're all familiar with that conversation, I'm sure. Continuous learning, I mentioned that before. It's really critical, particularly to the Gen Z entering the workforce. Obviously, fair compensation and benefits, but I've been on some webinars with nonprofit associations that say it's becoming increasingly important to do the best you can relative to comp and benefits. Authentic and compassionate leadership, that's always been the case, but again, the generation coming in is really prioritizing that they have leadership that they believe in, and that the work that they're doing aligns with their own personal values. And I think we're also probably all aware that more than ever, job applicants are evaluating companies based on how they're positively contributing to addressing challenges that face all of us. And obviously, that's a huge differentiator for your organizations relative to for-profit, and something to highlight in your recruiting efforts. And then, of course, increasingly, and again, accelerated by the events of the past few years, ensuring that you have a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workspace. That's no longer a nice to have, it's table stakes, really. Okay, next slide. Where am I? Okay, and so this is kind of the process in short, right? Engaging in effective hiring. So you source candidates, you go out and try and find them, and then you identify candidates that fit your profile, and then you have to try and recruit them to come and interview and spend time with you through the interview process, and then ultimately, the hiring process. So these are just sort of 4 buckets of processes. So sourcing, I think it's important. People sometimes slap up a 4-page job description on LinkedIn. The posting should be a distillation of the job description and very, very employee-centric. Let the person know what they're going to get out of the experience working for you, what they're going to learn, what their opportunities are, to the extent that you can. But we're all fighting over a tight pool of talent. And one thing that can set you apart is making sure your job description isn't a laundry list of things this person has to do for you, but a little bit also about what you're going to do for them. It's a more reciprocal approach than years past. And then find places to post the job description or the position ad that you had created. There's still LinkedIn is sort of the gold standard, but there's lots of other niche sites where you can post your job based on the skill set you're looking for. And then once you have identified candidates, either through them applying or you reaching out to them, you just have to stay in touch with them, be very transparent throughout the process, so that they are continually engaged and excited about the potential of working for you. The interview process, these are just 3 things that are really important. You should define, with the hiring team, what is most critical in terms of this person's experience or skills versus what you can train them up on. So making clear what you're evaluating each of the candidates against, so that they're all being evaluated consistently. Also, you should always have a diverse hiring team. People really expect, it's not expect so much as people look around, and if they see somebody that they feel they can identify with, that's a very positive experience. And if it's not at all diverse, it sends a signal that perhaps the organization isn't diverse either. And then hiring, the only point I really want to make there, regardless of the landscape, is act fast. Because if you find somebody you like and they're continuing to interview, there's a good chance someone else is going to like them as well. So this is critical, and try and keep the interview process streamlined, so you're not asking the person to keep coming back, or even getting on Zoom over and over again. So that's sort of the overview of hiring, and we can answer questions during the Q&A. Next slide. So outstanding onboarding. As I said, the best laid plans, if the onboarding experience is really clunky or ineffective, they don't have a computer those first day, they don't have email address, they don't have access to the technology that they need, the databases, etc. So just we all know we need to do this, but the impact on candidates or employees in the early days of having a bad experience onboarding really has a magnified effect. So prior to day 1, you should reach out. Team members of theirs should send them an email, send them a text. Leadership can also do so, just to really get the person excited. Go over what their 30-day onboarding plan will be, which we'll go over in a second. And then whatever paperwork you can get done before they start, that allows you to make day 1 a more engaging experience, rather than people feeling like all they're doing is sitting down, filling out paperwork and reading policies. So you want to get some of that done in advance, so that day 1, can really be fun and engaging, and people feel like they've begun the experience that they will have while they're with you. So these are just some ideas for day 1 activities. I won't read through them. Okay, next slide. So yeah, it's important that the onboarding, approach is not just one day or 1 week. These are things that you want to cover with new employees or new volunteers, and you certainly can't do it all in 1 day or 1 week, nor is it necessary. So during the first month, you want to make sure they understand all about your organization, history, mission, vision, values, culture. Make it clear to them what their role is, what their objectives are. It's important to be very clear up front what the expectations are of the role, and setting short-term goals, particularly in the beginning, so the person is getting lots of feedback. The more feedback, the more consistently, the better. And I touched on this earlier, but welcome them by the leadership team, by their colleagues, and any other partners, so that they very quickly understand who they're working with, and how to get things done. It's very frustrating when you don't know who the key contacts are. So these are things you can sort of plan out over a 30-day period. Next slide. Okay, so this is my last slide. So what do you do with this information? Well, you're going to have copies of this deck available to you, and hopefully some of it will be very helpful. But slides 6, 7, and 8 are the slides that contain content that could help you differentiate your organization and ensure that you're following the best practice hiring process that you can. So I would say review the slides, prioritize 1 to 2, undertakings from either of those areas, implement some changes and see if it made an impact on the hiring process, and then continue to tweak the process and the experience employees have once they're on board. I think that covers the content. So should we switch to Q&A, if there is any?
So thank you, David, and we'll go ahead and answer the questions coming in. Please continue to add your questions in the chat box as well. The first question comes from Lars. What are good alternatives to Indeed and LinkedIn for posting?
That's a very good question. They are still where everybody has, particularly LinkedIn, but probably a little less so Indeed. Everybody's there. So that's why it's such a good place. Nobody doesn't have a LinkedIn profile who you're seeking to hire. But there's also, 800 million people there, so it's hard to find them. You really need to understand where people you're looking to hire may be affiliated. So whatever your organization's cause is, if they have professional associations or some, websites where people share information, that's one area is sort of like the specialty, organizations and websites. I think the other area around LinkedIn is the important thing is that you are actively recruiting within LinkedIn, not just posting and hoping that people apply. And this is a function of a recruiter, but to go in and you can write Boolean searches of keywords and identify people who fit your profile, and then you have to recruit them to ask them to come and apply for the job. But I think it's important to note that LinkedIn is not just a job posting repository. It's a database where you can search talent proactively and then recruit them into the interview process. I'm sorry I don't have other specific sites, but beyond those two, it really becomes a matter of the particular focus of your organization.
Okay, and Jenny is asking actually, do you like Idealist?
I haven't spent a lot of time on it, to be fair. As I mentioned, most of my career was in the for-profit world, so I will take a closer look at it. I don't know if others have experience with them. I am aware that is another site where you can find talent, and obviously people who are specifically interested in roles where they can make a positive impact on society. So thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, and Debbie asks, when you say act first to hire good candidates, what do you mean? And how long is the typical hiring process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I maybe had a typo, but it meant to say act fast. So if I was wrong, I apologize. The process, the tighter the better, but the more senior the role, the more thoroughly you want to appraise somebody. So if you can post a job and have it filled within 8 weeks, you're doing pretty well, because there's a period of sourcing candidates and then the interview process. And because everybody's schedules are so busy, you'd be surprised how long it takes to schedule, interviews with 3 or 4, employees of the organization. But if you focus on the process and ensure that the hiring team, if there is one, are all aware of the priority of this, it's easy to blow off an interview because you have a client meeting or whatnot. So it all depends on how effectively you're managing the process on the inside to determine how quickly you can get the person on board once you identify candidates that you want to hire. So it's the process to find them and get them in there. But once you figure out who you want to hire, you just want to move as quickly as you can to get an offer in their hands.
Okay, next question comes from Edie. If it's a paid internship, can we have them sign the employee handbook, or do we need to create a specific intern handbook for them?
That's a very good question, and I'm gonna punt it a bit to legal. I think some companies do both. I think it can be very onerous and dispiriting to interns who are going to be with you for 8 to 10 weeks. And, it feels like they're signing their life away for future employment opportunities that are similar to the experience they had with your organization. So I would discourage having interns sign the exact document, but they should sign something. That's a couple pages long. And I'm sure there's examples on the internet, or if you have any access to any legal advice, because it's really a legal issue as much as anything else. But I wouldn't make them sign a 28-page handbook that says they can never do anything for the next year or whatever time frame that they also did with you as an intern. The thing about non-competes and those types of documents is they don't hold up well in court if you ever do get to court. So there's a lot of discussion about scaling back on who has to sign non-competes. Does the receptionist or the other operations person really need to sign the same non-compete and employee handbook as the CEO? It's not going to hold up in court, so it really doesn't make much sense. But that's another legal issue that's kind of working its way through.
Okay, Rebecca is asking a couple of questions. Where do younger folks, like people in their 20s, look for job opportunities? And what do you know about Handshake?
Okay, I'll answer Handshake first. I think Handshake works to help you find student employment, if I'm not mistaken, and interns as well. And they target, or you can target specific universities that you would like to recruit from. And Handshake is a platform that facilitates that process. I should have answered. I'm sorry, what was that? So and I've known a number of companies have had, success, and there's other competing platforms that do something similar. Oh, you asked me, where do 20-somethings look for jobs? I don't have any children in their 20s, and I'm embarrassing drawing a blank on the, I think they're on social media, right? And you can, people have tried recruiting through Facebook. That's never gone too well, but you can try any of the newer platforms to reach them.
Okay, and Maggie is asking, should we hire an independent recruiter to find talent or do it in-house?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It depends if you have the resources and you're going to have ongoing hiring needs. I think an organization has to hit a certain size, and that somewhere above 40-ish to have HR and recruiting in-house. It obviously is much less expensive long term if you are hiring several people and all you're paying is the recruiter's expenses, although they also need money for LinkedIn and Indeed and Idealist and other sites. But sometimes if you don't have that resource, and if somebody in the organization wants to learn how to post and search on LinkedIn, it's not hard. It's very intuitive, and certainly for very tech savvy people, you can buy a seat and then a couple of job slots. And I don't have the fees in front of me, but it's fairly inexpensive. But if you go to a recruiter for like anything below CEO is probably going to be 15 to 25%. It depends on the labor market. And as we noted earlier, the labor market is still really tight at 3.4% unemployment. So you'll probably pay, you can negotiate with all of these recruiters. They'll say they don't, but they do. And so I think trying to get them at 15% is probably a good target. I don't know that many will go below that. And one thing I wanted to add, I was struggling with the name of TikTok, but obviously everyone, I'm sure, is aware that TikTok is, where young and, I think Gen Z as well is spending a good part of their life, apparently. So I know organizations are definitely targeting TikTok to recruit.
Okay. Gilda is asking, how do we find volunteers to help leadership in a very small not-for-profit for older adults? Oh, wait, Taproot. I just noticed. Sorry, Gilda. Yeah, go to Taproot Plus right now. Sorry, I thought there was an employee-related question. So, but do you have other suggestions? I am going to open it up for beyond Taproot.
No, I mean, I'm a huge advocate of Taproot. Obviously, there are local, smaller sites, as I mentioned earlier, that are specialty sites based on what type of work you're doing. So just look for other, for professional associations of you and your peers, and also, just keep at, be sure that everyone in your network and your team's network and the volunteers network is aware that you're looking to hire people, because still employee referrals, and I assume the same is true of volunteer referrals, are your best hires. It's, that's been true for decades, that referrals tend to be very strong candidates and have hired very good employees. The risk, with strictly going through with referrals is if your organization is not diverse, often the referrals that come through are also not diverse. So it can be counterproductive to the diversity, equity, inclusion goals. So you have to balance the two.
Okay, and we'll end with one more question here, but please do add your questions in the chat box. We'll give David the remaining questions and he will take a look and email them. Ashley is asking, what are your thoughts on icebreakers for teams? I see the value in them from a business culture standpoint, but I don't necessarily enjoy participating in them myself as an employee.
Well, I agree. I don't like, nobody likes doing it, but I think based on what you're trying to achieve, they work. So, you don't want to do the same old icebreakers, and there's websites and all kinds of places that list icebreakers, and you can just pick one that you would find the least uncomfortable. I have a favorite one that somebody told me about not too long ago, and this was in the pandemic, so obviously everything was on Zoom, and the idea is ask everybody on the call to go run around their house or apartment, find an object that represents them and bring it back to the group and share why that particular object or photograph or whatever is meaningful to them. And that's one idea that I think is effective. But I think nobody admits to liking them, but most people, or a lot of people, will admit, hey, that actually worked. I learned something about people that I otherwise wouldn't have learned for quite some time. And that really is what impacts employee engagement, is having a good relationship with their colleagues.
Okay, well, David gave some fantastic information, and we'll be sending you an email, like I mentioned, afterwards with the recording of this presentation. And remember, our Taproot volunteers are here to help you, specifically develop your hiring onboarding strategy and then beyond. So please just sign up on taprootplus.org. And I'd also like to welcome everybody to join us for our next webinar. It is going to be on April 26th, Strategies to Mobilize Your Social Media Followers Around a Cause. The link will also be in that post-event email. And on behalf of Taproot, first, I'd like to give a huge thank you to you, David, for coming and sharing your insight. And thank you to all of you for joining us. It's been a pleasure to quote unquote see you all again, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.